the first time Vincent Moretti realized something was wrong, the woman he trusted more than anyone else was laughing across a dinner table with another man. That should not have mattered. Vincent controlled shipping routes, stretching from New York Harbor to the Gulf Coast, owned enough legitimate companies to sit beside governors without raising suspicion, and commanded enough fear in the underworld that rival organizations preferred negotiation over war. Men like Vincent Moretti did not lose sleep over who an employee chose to spend an evening with. Yet at 8:43 on a Thursday night, standing inside a private dining room 30 floors above Manhattan, he found himself staring at a security photograph instead of listening to a discussion worth nearly $80 million. The image showed Olivia Bennett seated beside a floor-to-ceiling window in a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. A candle burned between her and a man Vincent had never seen before. Olivia was smiling, not politely, not professionally, not the restrained smile she used at board meetings or charity events. She looked relaxed, happy, almost luminous. The sight unsettled him in a way no business threat had managed in years, because he suddenly realized he could not remember the last time she had looked that way while standing beside him. The conversation around the table continued, but Vincent heard almost none of it. The photograph remained on the screen of his phone, while executives argued over contracts and territory rights. Olivia had worked for him for 6 years. During those 6 years, she had become the invisible center of his empire. She knew every meeting before it happened, every weakness before it became dangerous, every lie before it spread. She remembered birthdays, legal deadlines, shipping manifests, security vulnerabilities, and the names of people who had once betrayed him a decade earlier. Whenever something went wrong, Olivia somehow discovered it before anyone else. Whenever a crisis threatened the organization, she solved half of it before bringing him the remaining half. People called her an assistant because the title made them comfortable. The truth was much harder to explain. Vincent trusted Olivia with information he would never share with blood relatives. He trusted her judgment more than he trusted most executives. Yet while he trusted her completely with his business, he knew almost nothing about her life outside the office. He did not know what made her laugh. He did not know who she called when she was hurt. He did not know what she dreamed about when she looked out the window during long flights. The realization landed with surprising force because the stranger sitting across from her seemed to know all of those things. By the time the meeting ended, Vincent had convinced himself the feeling would pass. It did not. 2 days later, he found himself noticing details he had ignored for years. Olivia left slightly later than everyone else. Olivia never accepted invitations to company parties. Olivia quietly redirected praise toward other people. Olivia never complained when executives spoke over her, yet somehow managed to solve the problems those same executives created. Most disturbing of all, Vincent began noticing how often other men watched her when they assumed nobody important was paying attention. The discovery irritated him far more than it should have. Olivia was not glamorous in the way magazines celebrated. She was curvy, intelligent, composed, and completely uninterested in demanding attention. Yet once Vincent started looking, he realized people noticed her constantly. They noticed the confidence she carried despite years of being underestimated. They noticed the warmth she showed employees nobody else remembered. They noticed the sharpness behind her calm demeanor. Most of all, they noticed what he had somehow failed to see while standing beside her every day. The more he recognized it, the more uncomfortable he became. 3 weeks later, the discomfort turned into something much worse. Olivia requested a meeting. Nothing about the request seemed unusual. She often met with him privately. Yet when she entered his office that afternoon, Vincent sensed immediately that something had changed. She was carrying a folder instead of her usual tablet. Her shoulders were tense. Her eyes avoided his for a fraction of a second longer than normal. Small details, perhaps, But Vincent built an empire by noticing small details. Olivia sat down across from him and placed the folder on his desk. Inside was a formal resignation letter. For several seconds, he simply stared at the paper because his brain refused to process what he was reading. Olivia Bennett was leaving. Not next year. Not in 6 months. In 30 days. The date sat on the page like an insult. Vincent read it twice before lifting his eyes toward her. Olivia explained calmly that another company had offered her a senior executive position. The promotion came with more authority, more compensation, and more opportunities than she could ever achieve while remaining an assistant. Everything she said was reasonable. Everything she said made sense. None of it made the pressure building inside his chest disappear. Vincent asked whether the decision was about money. Olivia said no. He asked whether someone inside the company had mistreated her. Olivia said no. He asked whether she was unhappy. This time she hesitated. The hesitation disturbed him more than any answer could have. Olivia looked toward the skyline beyond his office windows before finally admitting she was tired of building a future that belonged to everyone except herself. She said she had spent years helping powerful people achieve their goals while postponing her own. She said she wanted to know who she was, outside the shadow of somebody else's empire. Vincent listened in silence because every sentence revealed a truth he should have noticed years earlier. Then she mentioned the man from Brooklyn. Not by accident, not carelessly. She simply said she had started seeing someone and wanted the freedom to explore what that relationship might become. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Vincent responded with professionalism because decades of self-control demanded it. He congratulated her. He wished her success. He thanked her for her loyalty. Olivia smiled sadly and left his office believing the conversation was finished. It was not. Later that night, Vincent stood alone in his penthouse staring at Manhattan while a storm rolled across the Hudson River. He told himself Olivia deserved happiness. He told himself her resignation changed nothing. He told himself her personal life was none of his business. Unfortunately, facts did not care what he told himself. By midnight, he had read her resignation letter 6 times. By 1 in the morning, he was reviewing reports she managed every week. By 2, he realized there were entire departments that functioned only because Olivia quietly held them together. The thought should have been reassuring. Instead, it became terrifying, because for the first time he imagined the company without her. Then he imagined his life without her. The second realization hit harder than the first. Before he could fully examine it, his phone rang. Only a handful of people possessed that number. Vincent answered immediately. The voice on the other end belonged to his head of security. The man sounded shaken. That alone was alarming. "Boss," he said, struggling to keep his breathing steady. "Olivia's been taken." For a moment, Vincent thought he had misunderstood. Then a photograph arrived. The image showed Olivia outside a parking garage less than 20 minutes earlier. 2 men were forcing her into a black SUV. A third man stood nearby holding a silenced pistol. Vincent felt the world narrow into something cold and precise. Every instinct he possessed sharpened at once. Then a second image arrived. This one was far worse. It showed a confidential file spread across the hood of the vehicle. Across the top of the file, printed in bold red letters, were 4 words that instantly transformed Olivia's resignation, her new relationship, and the past 6 years into something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Property of the Moretti family was not printed as a label, a warning, or some careless intimidation tactic left behind by amateurs. It was typed in the same red classification stamp Vincent's father had used 25 years earlier on internal records that were supposed to have been burned after the old man died. Records tied to blood debts, hidden heirs, bought judges, buried informants, and the kind of family business even Vincent had spent years trying to drag into something cleaner. His first instinct was to order every exit in the city watched, every Moretti safe house opened, every rival lieutenant dragged into a room until somebody gave him a name. But the photograph forced him to stay still long enough to notice what Fury might have missed. Olivia's left hand was visible near the SUV door, 2 fingers curled against the seam of her coat in a pattern she had once used during a boardroom crisis to signal that the obvious emergency was not the real one. She had been taken, but she had also managed to leave him a message. And that meant the woman he had treated as indispensable paperwork had walked into danger with enough clarity to guide him from inside the trap. Vincent enlarged the file in the photograph until the grain of the paper blurred. And beneath the red stamp he saw a partial case number that did not belong to any active Moretti account. It belonged to a sealed inheritance archive from the winter his father died, an archive Vincent had never opened because every attorney in the family had sworn it contained nothing but tax documents and old succession papers. His head of security said the SUV's plates were cloned, the garage cameras had been looped, and the men who took Olivia moved with military discipline instead of street-level panic, which narrowed the list of enemies without making the answer easier. Then a second call arrived from Olivia's phone. Vincent answered, hearing traffic, breathing, and a man's voice distorted through a cheap filter, telling him not to involve police, not to mobilize the docks, and not to pretend the woman was merely an employee, when every man watching him now knew the truth before he did. The caller said Olivia would remain alive until dawn if Vincent delivered the original inheritance archive to an abandoned customs warehouse in Red Hook, and when Vincent asked who was speaking, the man laughed softly and told him to ask Olivia why she had been investigating the name Elena Moretti for the past 6 months. That name struck Vincent in a place no threat had ever reached. Elena Moretti had been his younger sister, a child buried with closed casket ceremony after a fire at the family's winter estate when Vincent was 17. For years he had carried her death as one of the few griefs money and violence could not repair. Yet Olivia's connection to that name made no sense unless someone had been feeding her pieces of a story she did not trust him enough to share. He turned from the window and ordered the archive opened remotely, ignoring the attorney's protests about sealed family instructions, and within minutes, encrypted scans began appearing on his private screen. What emerged was not a simple inheritance record. It was a network of guardianship payments, hospital transfers, adoption filings, and false identities buried beneath old Moretti shell companies. One document contained Olivia Bennett's childhood name. Another contained a photograph of a girl with dark curls standing beside Elena Moretti in front of the winter estate greenhouse, both children smiling at the camera with the unguarded brightness of people who did not yet know powerful but families could turn love into evidence. Vincent stared at that photograph until the room around him seemed to contract. Olivia had been part of his family's past before she became the woman who managed his present, and she had discovered enough to leave because staying beside him had become too painful or too dangerous. The jealousy that had first awakened when he saw her across from another man now twisted into something uglier than possession, because he finally understood that the dinner in Brooklyn had never been about romance alone. She had been meeting someone connected to the archive. The man in the photograph from the restaurant was not a harmless suitor competing for her attention. He was Daniel Reeve, a former federal records analyst who had disappeared from public service after exposing forged adoption files in 3 states. Vincent remembered the way Olivia had smiled at him and felt the shame of his own ignorance sharpen into a blade. While Vincent was busy feeling threatened by the idea of losing her, Olivia had been trying to uncover why his dead sister's name was buried inside documents connected to her own childhood. The first trace from Olivia's abduction came from a toll camera near the Brooklyn waterfront, where the black SUV passed under a broken light and briefly revealed a second vehicle following at a distance. Vincent's security team identified the car as registered to a consulting firm owned by Senator Malcolm Creed, a man who had spent the last year presenting himself as Vincent's political ally, while quietly trying to force Moretti shipping contracts through federal oversight boards. Creed was powerful, careful, and far too intelligent to kidnap Olivia without a reason larger than leverage. Vincent understood then that the file on the hood had been chosen to wound him into reckless movement. But the demand for the inheritance archive revealed a deeper fear. Creed did not want money. He wanted whatever Olivia had found before she could connect it publicly to the Moretti name, the senator's career, and the disappearance of a child everyone believed had died in a fire. Vincent ordered a decoy team toward Red Hook with a false archive, and sent his closest men toward the old estate vault because Olivia's signal, Elena's file, and Creed's sudden desperation all pointed backward rather than forward. Inside the moving SUV, Olivia kept her breathing slow and her wrists loose beneath the zip tie cutting into her skin, because panic wasted oxygen, and she had already spent years learning how not to give cruel men the satisfaction of watching her break. She recognized one of the kidnappers by his cufflinks before he covered his face, and that recognition terrified her more than the weapon pressed near her ribs. He was not a rival soldier. He was attached to Creed's private security detail, which meant the senator had stopped hiding behind legal pressure and had decided to erase her breath before Vincent realized the archive proved Elena Moretti had not died in the fire. Olivia had not planned to leave Vincent because she loved Daniel Reeve, or because she wanted a cleaner career. She had planned to leave because she had found medical records suggesting she had been placed in foster care under a false name, after the same estate, fire, and every path toward the truth ended at a question too dangerous to ask inside Vincent's empire. If Elena had survived, if Olivia's childhood memories were not dreams, and if the Moretti family had stolen more than money from its own bloodline, then Vincent might look at her not as the woman he wanted too late, but as the living proof of a crime his father built into the foundation of their world. At 3:12 in the morning, Vincent entered the old estate through the underground wine passage, while rain battered the glass roof above the abandoned greenhouse. The house smelled of stone, ash, and generations of expensive silence. His men swept the corridors, but Vincent moved toward the nursery wing without waiting for them, following a floor plan Olivia had stored under a fake vendor file years earlier, long before she resigned, long before she was taken, long before he was honest enough to admit that she had understood his life more deeply than he had understood hers. Behind a boarded fireplace in Elena's old room, he found a steel lockbox wrapped in oilcloth and marked with the same case number from the photographed file. Inside was a cassette tape, a sealed medical bracelet, and a birth certificate naming Elena Moretti as deceased on a date 3 days before the fire officially occurred. Before Vincent could process what that meant, his phone lit up with a live video call from Olivia's number. Her face appeared bruised but steady inside a warehouse office, and behind her stood Senator Creed holding a gun against Daniel Reeve's temple, while saying, "Bring me what your assistant found, or I tell her who she really is, before you do." Vincent did not answer Senator Creed immediately, because the wrong response would give the man holding Olivia exactly what he wanted: fear, dressed up as obedience. He kept the phone angled so his security chief could record the room behind her, the cracked warehouse window, the blue customs seal painted on the wall, and the reflection of a rusted loading crane visible in the glass beside Creed's shoulder. Olivia understood what he was doing before anyone else would have, and even with bruising along her cheekbone and a zip tie cutting into one wrist, she shifted her weight just enough to reveal the corner of a shipping manifest taped beneath the office desk. Vincent saw the number, matched it to a condemned Pier Olivia had flagged months earlier as too expensive to repair and too strategically useless to matter. then realized she had never believed in useless details, and the humiliation of discovering that the woman Vincent wanted had been placed inside his life by history itself. But Olivia's eyes never left the screen. She was not begging him to save her. She was giving him directions. The drive to Pier 19 took 11 minutes through service roads slick with rain and oil, though Vincent experienced it as one long tightening of every restraint he had ever built around himself. In the back seat, the lockbox rested beside the medical bracelet, the cassette tape, and the birth certificate that had rewritten the dead into the possible. His men wanted a direct breach, but Vincent refused to let Creed turn Olivia into collateral damage inside a warehouse designed for crossfire and cameras. Instead, he used the thing Creed had underestimated most, Olivia's systems. Months earlier, she had rerouted dormant customs sensors into Moretti's private network after noticing someone used inactive Piers for unregistered shipments. And now those forgotten sensors gave Vincent a living map of the building. 6 heat signatures waited near the office. 2 more guarded the loading bay. Daniel Reeve was alive, restrained near the east wall. Olivia was seated close to a breaker panel, exactly where she would sit if she wanted the entire building to lose power. At the precise moment Vincent needed darkness more than speed. Creed called again when Vincent reached the perimeter, and this time Olivia spoke before the senator could enjoy himself. Her voice was low, controlled, and almost unbearably steady when she told Vincent not to bring the lockbox inside unless he was prepared to hear the truth from her, instead of from men who had spent decades profiting from silence. Creed laughed and said the truth was simple. Olivia Bennett had once been Elena Moretti, smuggled out of the fire by a nurse paid to erase her after Vincent's father decided a daughter with inheritance rights was more dangerous than a dead child. The medical bracelet in Vincent's hand confirmed the blood type, the birth date, and the tiny crescent scar Olivia still carried near her collarbone from an injury she had always believed came from broken glass in foster care. Vincent felt the revelation strike deep enough to rearrange his grief, but it did not turn love into horror or desire into shame, the way Creed expected. It turned every year of Olivia's loneliness into an indictment against the family name he had inherited. Creed made his final mistake when he ordered Olivia to look at Vincent and understand that every tenderness between them was now poisoned by blood, legacy, and lies neither of them had chosen. Olivia looked at the screen, at the man who had failed to see her fully until losing her became possible, and she answered with a calmness that made Creed's smile harden. She said, Vincent was not his father, and she was not a secret any man in that room got to use twice. Then she drove her bound wrist down against the metal edge of the breaker lever. Not hard enough to free herself, but hard enough to kill the lights across half the warehouse. Vincent's team moved through the dark from 3 entrances, not with theatrical chaos, but with disciplined precision, disabling guards before they could fire blindly into the office. Creed dragged Olivia backward, using her body as a shield, while Daniel Reeve threw himself sideways into the senator's knees with the desperate strength of a man who had spent years carrying guilt for records he exposed too late. The gun went off once into the ceiling. Concrete dust fell like gray rain, and Vincent reached Olivia before Creed could recover his grip. What followed was not mercy, and it was not the kind of revenge that leaves a kingdom satisfied for one bloody night, while the rot survives underneath. Vincent could have ended Creed in that warehouse and called it justice, but Olivia stopped him with one word, not because the senator deserved life, but because she had spent years building proof, strong enough to outlive fear. The cassette from the lockbox contained Vincent's mother confronting his father about Elena's false death. The foundation accounts showed Creed's family receiving payments for laundering adoption records, and Daniel carried copies of the forged state filings that tied the senator to a network of erased children and stolen inheritances. By sunrise, Every document was in the hands of federal officers Creed had not bought, reporters he had failed to intimidate, and judges whose names Olivia had kept on a separate list because she trusted systems only after building safeguards around their weaknesses. Creed was arrested publicly on the pier, while cameras captured him shouting that the Moretti family had made him, and for once Vincent let the accusation stand, because truth did not become weaker when it wounded him too. Olivia was taken to a private medical suite under the protection of men who now understood that guarding her was not a favor to Vincent, but a debt owed to the woman who had preserved the empire while uncovering the crime beneath it. Daniel survived with cracked ribs and a confession heavy enough to help dismantle Creed's political network. The man from Brooklyn was not Olivia's lover, though Vincent had to live with the shame of how quickly jealousy had exposed the hunger he had hidden from himself. He had been her witness, her researcher, and the first person outside Moretti blood willing to believe that a plus-sized executive assistant with quiet eyes could be standing at the center of a buried dynasty and not know it. When Vincent entered Olivia's room after the doctor finished with her wrist, he did not touch her without permission. He placed the medical bracelet, the birth certificate, and the Moretti seal on the table beside her bed, then stepped back as if approaching a sovereign whose territory he no longer had the right to claim. Olivia looked at the objects for a long time before looking at him, and the silence between them held too much history to be repaired by one confession. Vincent told her he would have every court record corrected, every stolen asset restored, and every remaining account tied to his father's crimes open to independent review under her authority. But she raised one bandaged hand before he could turn guilt into policy and hide inside action again. She said she did not want to become a symbol, a secret daughter, a redeemed tragedy, or another woman whose life was reorganized around the Moretti name. She wanted the truth, her brother's memories recovered where possible, Daniel protected, and the right to decide whether Olivia Bennett remained who she was, or Elena Moretti became part of who she chose to be. Vincent accepted every demand without negotiation, because he finally understood that protection without respect was only another form of control. When he told her he loved her, he did it without possession, without claiming destiny, without asking the revelation of her blood to make his longing easier. Olivia's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall quickly. She reached for his hand only after making him wait long enough to know the difference between being forgiven and being trusted again, then said she would stay for 30 days to rebuild the company's legal structure before deciding whether Vincent Moretti deserved any place in the life she was taking back.